Chapter Spooks.
G'day, and welcome back to Chapter Spooks, where we talk about the books that keep your kids up at night. And today, we've got a book that I honestly forgot entirely about. I have actually read these books before, and usually I have some recollection of what happened in them, but I couldn't remember a single thing about this book. Couldn't remember the main character, the villain, what happened in it. And after reading it for this podcast episode, I have to say, I fully understand why. It's so bland, the characters don't actually make sense, so they don't really stick in your head, and there's not really much of a moral or meaning. I mean, there is one at the very end, but it's so generic that it obviously didn't stick at all. So at the end, I guess we'll talk about ways to try to avoid stories being so generic that they're literally forgettable. But before we get into the book proper, there's one thing I have to bring up. So the main character of this book's name is Tori. And when I read that on the blurb, I thought that was just some little pun. I mean, I don't know too much about pop culture, but even I've heard of Tori spelling. And since this book is about witches and magic, I thought, is that just a little joke? She's named Tori because this book is about spells, Tori spelling. But that was dismissed when I read the thank you page of this book. And I'll read it to you now. It says, "For my friend, Tori Pardo, her brother Max, and all my other friends in the American School of Madrid, Spain." Now, the thing is, the main character of this book is called Tori Pardo, and she has a brother called Max, and she's described as having dark hair and olive-colored skin, so she's obviously got Hispanic heritage. Right? So I honestly find that a little unsettling. I mean, you'll figure it out when we get into the book, but I actually don't like the character of Tori Pardo, so it's a bit of an unfair representation, but I really don't like putting real people in your books like that. It's kind of gross because, like, even if it is a really good interpretation of them, it's unfair to put that kind of pressure on someone. I mean, if you ever want to see how disturbing this can be, just look at Winnie the Pooh. You may not realize this, but Christopher Robin is actually based on Christopher Robin Milne, which is the name of A.A. Milne, the author's son. And he had a lot of trouble when he got older. Like, when he donated his toys to a museum, so many people were upset that little Christopher Robin was donating his toys to a museum, even though he was 60 years old at the time. He was an old man. He had no need for toys. But people just couldn't deal with the fact that this character that they'd grown up and loved and cherished, who in their eyes even was a good character, had now become an old man who had grown past his toys, no longer had adventures in the woods with his friends. It's deeply disturbing to me, and so I wholeheartedly say, even without reading this book, and even without hearing this, my advice to any author is please do not do this. It is uncomfortable in so many ways for the reader, like as me as the reader, but also for the person that you're trying to celebrate. It puts way too much pressure on them. It doesn't affect the plot, but it could very much have affected her life. But anyway, speaking of, I think we've wasted time long enough. Let's now get into Bone Chillers number 5, Strange Brew. So in our first chapter, we're introduced to the main character, Tori Pardo, and she's basically just whinging. She's walking to school with her friend Heather, who's just told her that her family now plans to go to Florida during the summer holidays instead of staying in Illinois. And this upsets Tori because she originally had been planning to go on holiday, but because her brother made the baseball team, apparently he'll get kicked off the team if he ever misses a game, so the family cancelled their trip. So now, not only is she not going on a trip, but now her friend is leaving, meaning that she's going to have to spend the entire summer holiday on her own. I could point out the fact that if she was planning on going on holiday, that technically means that she was planning on leaving her friend behind on her holiday. So it's kind of selfish that she's whinging that her friend is now leaving. It's not out of character for her, as you'll see throughout the rest of the book, but this is a terrible way of introducing your main character. But they do go on to describe, as I said, that she is Hispanic, she's got dark hair and olive-colored skin, but also she's very outgoing. She likes doing fun things. She's kind of a thrill seeker, whereas her friend Heather is more careful and considered. She's more of a bookworm, she likes more of the intellectual pursuits, she kind of likes playing games and having a chat. But despite their differences, they have been best friends since a very young age. Anyway, we then start chapter 2, and as they get to school, this is when Tori notices a spiral notebook on the ground near a garbage bin. Apparently she hears it like clunk against the bin, and she turns and she sees a book, and she realizes that the book is actually hers. Not only does it say on the front, like Tori Pardo, secret stuff, do not read, something like that, but also when Heather picks it up, she suddenly panics because she remembers that this thing used to be her diary. See, when she was a kid, she was kind of lonely before she had many friends. She does have Heather, she's had her for a while. But she also used to have an imaginary friend before Heather called Celeste. Apparently some twee little blonde girl who was just as outgoing and exciting as Tori. But during the time when she first met Heather, they started going together. And then one day she was sick. She had the sniffles or something, I think the book says. And in anger, she wrote this angry diary entry saying, "Oh, Heather is the worst. I wish she wasn't my friend because she's not fun. She's not a good friend at all." It's basically some bitter, 8-year-old nonsense. But she's embarrassed about having written it. She regrets it, and she doesn't want Heather to read it, so she snaps at Heather No, give me the book. You can't have it. Give me that book. But even though she's basically telling her, don't read the book, and the book says on the front cover, do not read, Heather opens it anyway, which is a little rude. I mean, she doesn't necessarily know it's a diary, but it does say keep out on the front. But as Heather turns the pages and Tori is panicking inside, she sees that the pages are blank. The whole book seems to be completely empty except for the last page. On the very last page, they both read the book because it's got a weird spell on the back pages. Here's an excerpt from the book so I can read the spell properly. To cook up a fierce storm with roaring thunder, streaking lightning, and howling wind, gather the following: 1 cauldron, 2 round smooth stones, 3 dead lightning bugs, 4 chicken bones picked clean, 5 leaves from a dead oak tree, 6 spider legs, 7 pinches of red pepper, 8 lumps of coal, 9 matchsticks broken in half, 10 hairs from a black cat, 11 toenail clippings, 12 horsefly wings, 13 cups of water from a scummy pond. Set the cauldron beneath the dead oak tree. Add ingredients in the order listed. Add water 1 cup at a time. When all the ingredients are in the cauldron, stir counterclockwise with a wooden spoon as fast as you can until a whirlpool forms. Then lightning will crackle, thunder will boom, wind will howl, and rain will pour down from the sky in torrents. The 2 girls looked at each other and shivered. It must be somebody's idea of a joke," Heather said in a shaky voice, throwing a frightened look over her shoulder. She raced towards the school, adding, "Come on, let's hurry. It's almost time for the bell." Tori stayed where she was, rereading the recipe. Tingles raced up her spine at the thought of actually following the instructions in the recipe. "I know it sounds creepy, but what if it really is magic? Imagine how it would feel if we followed the directions and cooked up an honest-to-goodness storm," she said excitedly when she finally caught up with Heather. "Don't talk that way, Tori Pardo," Heather warned. Her face was so pale that her freckles stood out like measles. "I told you, it's got to be a joke. There's no such thing as magic. Nobody can make a storm just by throwing a bunch of things into a pot. And besides, which one of us is going to pull 6 legs off a spider or 10 hairs from a black cat? If you want to do that weird stuff, you can make the recipe." I gotta say, one of the things this book does kind of right, at least in my opinion, is it has this weird sort of sympathetic magic style it's going for. They're brewing up a storm, so they need to throw in lightning bugs and also stones, the cracking stones, cracking thunder. It makes sense to me on that sort of, like I said, sympathetic magic idea. I mean, it's all nonsense, obviously, but I kind of like how it sort of follows that similar emotional logic of making magic work. What I don't like, though, is how Heather reacts, horrified. All she did was read a silly recipe. And yeah, sure, reading can be scary. After all, that's the whole point of what we're reading this book for. We're trying to read a scary book. But it's just a silly recipe written by a silly kid in a kid's notebook. It even says that it's Tori's notebook, but she's acting like she just read the Necronomicon and is freaking out. Oh, it can't be real. And sure, one way to make readers scared, is to show that your characters are scared. But this is something that happens in a few books like this, where they do something completely innocuous, but because it's slightly odd and the book is trying to imply that it's horrifying, the kid is like, oh no, it's horrifying. And there are even scenes, I swear, in some Goosebumps books where something simple happens, like they open the door and they see that their sandwich is missing and they scream. Anyway, after some back and forth, basically it turns out that Tori really wants to try the spell. Heather is, of course, still freaked out because, of course, she is. And Tori finally decides, like, she gets all the ingredients together, but she decides she wants to do this, but she doesn't feel comfortable doing it on her own. So she encourages Heather to join her. Heather still doesn't want to be involved, but because Tori's her friend, she does agree to come along and watch, at the very least. So they go to Tori's house and they stir up the spell, and it works. It starts raining, like, really heavily. And I have to say, when I first read it, it seemed like another example of what I was just talking about, how it's like something innocuous and yet they're freaking out, like, oh no, it's raining a lot, scary. But upon rereading, I realized the issue isn't that the girls are overreacting. The issue is that the descriptions are underexpressive. I didn't realize when I first read it that the backyard is like literally turning into a lake. This isn't just a storm, it's basically a flood. But the story doesn't go into enough detail to explain that, and so I did see that. I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end, but that's a big issue this book has, is under-describing scenes. Anyway, the storm does stop shortly after, but just at that moment, Max and their parents come home. See, Max was at a baseball game, and of course, because it started absolutely torrenting down rain, they had to call the game. And yeah, sure, Tori didn't think of it, but in the back of her mind, at the chapter end, she does think to herself, you know what? He did kind of deserve it. The next day, as Tori and Heather are heading to school, they're just talking about what happened a little bit, but what's important is that Heather suddenly trips. And she's very upset by this because she gets up and she says, Tori, you tripped me. How dare you? And then Tori's like, well, no, I didn't do that. Because she didn't, you know, we read it in the book ourselves. She didn't trip her friend. She gets insulted, though, that her friend basically calls her a liar for saying she didn't trip her, and so they stop being friends for a little bit. I'm not saying that's unrealistic. In real life, female friendships can be quite volatile. I've seen it firsthand. But I have to say that, especially in this book where Tori has been quite annoying and whining and picking on her friend, this is not a great way to ingratiate your main character with the reader. After a few pages talking about how these girls are upset with one another, they're not hanging out, Tori goes to class and she sees a note on her desk. And at first she's hopeful. She thinks maybe it's an apology note from Heather for calling her a liar. But it turns out, instead, it's another note written in that same handwriting as before. It's another one of those spells. And this is what it does this time. Here's an excerpt. Foolproof way to make everyone throw up. Get a brown paper lunch bag and put the following things in it. A rotten potato, a squashed bug, 3 pennies, 1 dirty sock. At lunchtime tomorrow in the cafeteria, close your eyes, shake the bag gently, and whisper these magic words 3 times. Belch, burp, barf. Gag, retch, spew. An awful feeling is coming over you. Belch, burp, puke, slobber, spit, spew. There is not a single thing that you can do. Again, another cute bit of sympathetic magic. Although, I do have to say, I don't like that the rhyme rhymes spew twice. Like, couldn't they have mixed up a little bit? You know, like gurgle, spittle, spew, and barf. You feel your insides twist in half. Come on, I came up with that in 2 minutes. Come on, put a little effort in there, guys. But what really matters is that Tori decides that she wants to do this. She seems to think it'll be funny. And, like, yeah, of course, it'll affect everyone, including her best friend, Heather. But she decides, hey, Heather kind of deserves it because she called me a liar? We'll discuss this later at the end of the book, but okay, whatever. So that night, she packs up a lunch bag with a rotten potato, which apparently she could just find overnight. For me, it takes a while to find a rotten potato, but whatever. Then the next day, she does exactly as it says. She whispers to herself, shapes the bag, and the spell works perfectly again. In fact, as soon as she's done saying the rhyme, kids just start chucking their guts all over the place. We get a description of how all the students, all the teachers, everyone in the cafeteria, except for Tori, just starts puking their guts out. I still think it's a little bit lacking, but it's definitely better than the prior scene was. But what's more important is that after the scene, Tori starts laughing to herself. This girl is a sociopath. Later that day, Heather approaches her to apologize. She says, I'm sorry, you're my best friend. I don't even know what I was thinking. You were not the kind of person who would trip me like that. So Tori accepts the apology. She apologizes as well for getting upset, and they become friends again. Tumultuous relationships, these young girls. But after they get back together, Heather then insists, and she asks, please, be honest. You did the vomiting thing again, didn't you? I'm gonna say, I think it's a little weird that she's so insistent, seeing as how she didn't even believe that magic was real. But no. Anyway, she's right, and Tori admits it and says, yeah, I did it. I just thought it'd be fun. And Heather's like, what are you talking about, fun? Are you crazy? Do you have any idea how sick I was yesterday? And you made all the teachers and the students. Look, promise me you're not going to keep doing this magic stuff because it's going to get you in a lot of trouble. Tori doesn't like this idea because she really enjoys doing the magic. It's, to her, a lot of fun. It's like an adventure for her. She feels powerful being able to use these spells. But Heather is her best friend, and she tends to be right about these things. She's a smart girl. So Tori quietly promises, okay, I won't use magic anymore. Either way, the school declares that some sort of virus has obviously taken over the school, so everyone is sent home early. And when Tori gets home, she sees that she's gotten a letter, which is odd, but she opens it up, and it's another note in that same handwriting. It's another spell. This one says that it'll make her fly. It wants her to put some dandelion puffs and some dust into grease and then rub it on her skin at midnight and stand outside and apparently wait for some lightning bug. My understanding is lightning bugs are fireflies, right? So basically wait until some fireflies come out and they'll lead her into the sky. And I have to admit, that's a pretty cool spell. Who doesn't want to fly, right? So she does as the spell commands. She mixes up the spells, she puts it on her skin, she waits at midnight, she finds some fireflies, and she goes up into the sky. She starts flying around doing loop-de-loops. Again, I don't think the descriptions are good enough, but still, she goes flying through the sky and she goes taken out to that lake. Apparently the same one where she got the pond scum from before. So I guess it's a pond, not a lake, but whatever. So she lands on the ground and there's a girl there who's talking to her in the shadows of the tree. She's wondering, well, who could this girl be? I don't know you. And the girl says, oh no, you know who I am. And she steps out of the shadows. And who could it be? Of course you know who it is. It's the only other character we've been told about. It's Celeste. It's her imaginary friend. Now flesh and blood. And she explains that she's the one where these spells have been coming from. She wants her to be a friend again. She wants to have fun. After all, with Heather going away over that holiday period, then it's a good time for them to spend more time together, right? But my favorite moment is this pointless, contrived bit of dialogue, which I'm just going to quote straight from the book here. A shadow crossed Tori's mind. Can I ask you a question? Sure, said Celeste. How did you get to be real? And how do you do those things? I mean, aren't they magic? Tori asked, just above a whisper. Celeste smiled mysteriously. Don't worry about any of it, she said. Just trust me. We're friends, aren't we? Tori nodded. So how does the magic and the imaginary friend come to life? And the whole main conceit of this book work? Don't worry about it. You're thinking too much. Don't worry about it. I mean, seriously, what is the point of bringing up the question if the answer to the question is, don't ask? But now we get a plot critical moment in the book because Celeste has been like, yeah, we'll do more magic, hang out, it's going to be fun. Tori says, hey, I got an idea. Why don't we tell Heather all about this? Then she could do it with us. That'd be so much fun. And this is when Celeste turns. She becomes angry and says, you don't need Heather anymore. You've got me. And then shortly after, she disappears. And the next day, before Tori even gets to school, she gets a call from Heather's mother to explain to her that Heather, last night, around midnight, fell down the stairs. She even mentions it's weird because she doesn't usually get up in the night, but she fell down the stairs and broke her arm. And the implication is obvious that clearly Celeste, mad that she brought up Heather in their conversation last night, went to Heather's house, tripped her down the stairs. And that's a pretty intense concept, but it's actually kind of brought down by the fact that Heather's mother then says, oh, and she'd love to see you, so could you get her homework and bring it home to her from school? Which, to me, begs the question, why is she staying home from school? Like, don't get me wrong, falling down the stairs can be nasty, but In a later scene, they literally say, oh, I'm lucky that all that happened was I broke my arm. You're staying home from school because of broken arm? And there's literally one day, she goes to school the next day. Why is she staying home if she just has a broken arm? She even has a cast on it by the time she gets there. The only explanation I can think of is if they couldn't put the cast on that night, or maybe it takes a while to dry. I don't know. I've never had a broken arm, but my point is, plaster of Paris is cheap. It doesn't make any sense they wouldn't have it. Why doesn't she go to school the next day? But maybe it makes sense, it just doesn't seem to make sense to me. The only reason I can think of as to why she's not there at school is because that night before, Celeste had told Tori that she should get out of school in the middle of the day and go to the bathroom, and she'll meet her there. And I guess that means now that Heather's not there to be her conscientious friend while she is again trying to get more magic from this imaginary friend of hers. But anyway, she goes to the bathroom, does as Celeste says, and she's hoping to meet her there, but Celeste isn't there. Instead, she's written another spell on the bathroom mirror with soap. But this is where the tension gets a little bit interesting to me, because every other spell has been like, this spell does this, this spell does this, but this is the first time how it just has a list of ingredients, like some mud and some grass and stuff, and it says, put an X on people's desks tomorrow before school, and then something fun will happen. And P.S., wipe this off the mirror and memorize it so no one else sees it. I kind of like this. It's an interesting way of ramping up the tension. I think that this book is actually lacking in tension just as much as it's lacking in description, but this is a clever way of making the story more impactful, because now it's like, okay, how far down the rabbit hole has she gone? Does she trust Celeste enough that she's giving her spells that could do anything, and she's going through with it anyway? And this does lead to a kind of clever twist, because Tori decides, okay, I'll do it. I'll try this spell. It says it'll be fun. So she mixes up the stuff the night before. She goes to school early, and she puts these X's on kids' desks, which is pretty ominous. And she looks at her own desk, and she says, well, the last spell I did at school made everyone throw up. Do I want it to happen to me as well? But no, she decides, okay, I'll do it on my desk. So she does it, and then she waits the next day. All the kids come to class. They come in. They sit at their desks. And then the room is filled with bubbles. Bubbles start coming out of everyone's desk. You know, all the kids are having so much fun. They're getting out and popping the bubbles, and then the bubbles get more and more, and they start turning into like soap suds, like snow all around the classroom made of soap bubbles. And the kids are having fun. The teacher's having a bit of trouble now because it was fun at first, but now she wants to get the class under control. Until after, I think about 5 minutes, the principal bursts in saying, "What on earth is going on here?" And then all of the bubbles pop, disappear. So hey, that was a pretty fun, beautiful little spell. But now, because the principal's there and he wants to know who's pulled this prank, he then basically interrogates every single kid in that classroom, starting from A going to Z. And because Tori's last name is Pardo, she's like halfway through, and so the more students go in, she sees students going in. In fact, she notices one of the students go in, and she comes out and she's crying her eyes out at her desk. She like passes her note, "What's going on?" She's like, "I told him I didn't do it, but he was still accusing me." Like, things are getting kind of serious here. So when she's finally called into the principal's office, this next scene, it's pretty shocking. So here, I'm going to read an excerpt. Tori stood up on trembling legs and headed toward the office. What would Mr. Dowsley do to her if he found out the truth, she wondered. Expel her from school? What would she tell her parents? But the bubbles were all in fun, she argued silently. They didn't hurt anybody, and everybody loved them, including Miss Franklin. They're gone now, so what's the big deal? Who cares where they came from? Tori smiled to herself. That was what she would tell Mr. Dowsley. She would make him see how silly it was to look for someone to punish. She was feeling confident when she opened the office door and stepped inside. Mr. Dowsley was sitting at his desk with his back to her, talking on the phone. The instant Tori sat down in the chair beside his desk, he whirled around and slammed down the phone. His face was a storm cloud. All her confidence vanished. He rose slowly to his feet and glared at her. His huge bulk and his bushy dark hair made him look more like a bear than ever. A giant grizzly bear about to attack. Tori shrank back. She braced herself for what was coming. The principal sucked in a deep breath and opened his mouth to speak. Suddenly his eyes grew large. He sucked in another breath and another. Achoo! He sneezed, so hard the desk shook. Achoo! 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 Mr. Dowsley was sneezing so fast he could hardly catch his breath. Achoo! 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 Tori watched open-mouthed as his knees buckled under him. He grabbed at the desk as he slowly crumpled to the floor. Achoo! 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 Tori's heart was racing as she knelt beside him. Mr. Dowsley, are you all right? She cried. He didn't answer. Achoo! 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 Suddenly, Mrs. Dawson, the school secretary, raced into the room. Mr. Dowsley, she cried, is something She let out a shriek. The principal's face had turned purple. His eyes bulged. He was rolling and writhing on the floor, frantically mopping his face with a handkerchief. Achoo! 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 Miss Dawson grabbed the phone and punched in 911. Then she turned to Tori and shouted, Go back to your room and tell your teacher not to send anyone else to the office. I'm calling an ambulance. Tori did as she was told. She explained to her teacher and the class that Mr. Dowsley was having a sneezing attack and would have to go to the hospital. Back at her desk, she listened to the wail of the siren grow closer and finally stop outside the school. A new fear gripped her now. Josh Ackerman's words rang in her mind. He's going to find out who it was if it kills him. Had it been a coincidence that Mr. Dowsley started sneezing the moment he was ready to question her about the bubbles? Or had it been the work of Celeste? I gotta say, whilst I'm a little disappointed that we didn't get the confrontation that I was waiting for, this is also kind of my favourite scene in the book, because it's both like slightly whimsical, it's got that magical feel to it, it's sneezing, but at the same time, like, he's turning purple in the face, and you can understand sneezing is like a medical issue, and it doesn't stop. So it's clearly magical, but it's also clearly like slightly fun, so it's just whimsical and childish enough that you can sort of be like, okay, maybe Celeste wasn't trying to be evil and stop him, but at the same time, she put him in like mortal danger, he needed to go to the hospital. I really like that balance. It threads the needle between too dark and too silly. Very well done. And Tori can't get that thought out of her head. Celeste must be behind this. So that night, she actually tries to use magic to her own advantage. She has a little bit of that flying salve left under her bed. So she puts it on her skin, she goes out at midnight, and once again, those fireflies come after her, so she flies off, and she meets Celeste at the pond again. And she says to her, You did that, didn't you? You made the principal sneeze like that. And Celeste is like, Yeah, I did. Aren't you glad I got you out of trouble like that? And Tori's, of course, a bit upset. She's like, well, he could have been hurt, he could have been... And Celeste basically brushes her off, says, Don't worry about it. What are you talking about? This magic is fun. I did it to help you. I'm making your life so much easier. I'm trying to be your best friend here. I mean, don't you enjoy the flying? Don't you enjoy all this stuff? Weren't you laughing when all the kids were puking at school? Didn't you have fun? And Tori has to admit to herself, yeah, I did have fun. And so, even though she came there to argue with Celeste, Celeste is like, yeah, why don't we have fun together? Let's do some flying. And so they literally spend the rest of the night flying until the early hours of the morning. So when Tori goes back home, she's so exhausted she just goes to sleep. The next day, when her alarm goes off, she's so tired she doesn't really want to go to school, but she forces herself to because she really wants to know if the principal's okay. So she goes to school the next day, but first things first, she's immediately confronted by Heather. She says that she heard about this bubble trick and she knows it has to have been magic. That's the only explanation. And so she starts not only berating her for having done magic again, but she actually then accuses her. She says, look, I've been thinking about it. I realize that that trip that happened the other night, that makes no sense. I don't usually get up like that. Nothing was there to trip me. It must have also been magic. And then, hey, it's the same thing that happened the other day when I tripped, and that must have been you as well. So I'm not hanging out with you anymore. You're too dangerous. And so for the second time in the book, Tori and Heather are no longer friends. And it's now when Tori's at her lowest, when Principal's been attacked, she's lost her best friend, when she hears a whispering on the wind that says, You'll find me again tonight. Just dig up the roots of that old dead oak tree in your yard, and you'll find a message from me. And I don't know whether it's because she's too lonely or whether she's desperate to have some more power in her hands, but that night, sure enough, she goes to a tree, she digs it up, and she finds a message in a bottle. And the message is another spell. Yet again, a spell that doesn't say what it does. It just says, this is going to be the most fun of all. Mix up the magic potion, some coffee that's been overdone, some pickled juice, and some water. Mix it in this bottle and bring it with you to the school tonight. And because Tori doesn't know how to say no to having even more of this magic power, she does as it says. She puts the pickle juice and the coffee together. They don't have any rainwater puddles, but she gets a puddle from the dripping tap in the backyard, puts it in the bottle, shakes it up, and takes it with her to the school that night. At the front gates of the school, she meets Celeste. Celeste says, alright, let's go inside. Of course, it doesn't make sense, the school should be locked up, but Celeste says, what are you talking about? The school's not locked up. And sure enough, she opens the door, and they head on inside. And they head straight for the principal's office. And Celeste says, alright, let's have some real fun. And she starts trashing the place. She starts taking paper and throwing it all over the floor, ripping pages out of books, scrunching it up, throwing it about the place. And Tori joins her. Because I guess she really is a bit of a sociopath. She decides it's going to be so much fun trashing the place. So the book literally says that she hums a Snoop Dogg song to herself as she's shredding stuff, ripping up the place. I wonder if that's meant to be an homage to the Office Space scene that's now like a meme. But either way, they totally trash the place. Throw paper everywhere. And then Celeste says to her, alright, it's time for the magic. So she gets her to drip a little bit of this potion onto a bit of paper. And so Tori does as she's told, and she's not really sure what it's for. Nothing seems to happen at first, and then suddenly there's a spark. And the paper catches on fire. In fact, Tori starts panicking. She gets something to put out the fire, but no, Celeste starts whirling around at a whirlwind, which casts the flame even bigger and spreads it quickly throughout the office. The whole place is on fire now. Smoke is billowing out of the office. So Celeste grabs her friend's hand and they run out of the office, and Tori turns and sees as not only the office, but then the rest of the school is caught ablaze. And Tori is delighted. She actually says that it looks beautiful as she joyously jumps up and down, saying that the school is finally out. No more school. She watches the fire rage through the school, but then the fire trucks start coming, and she sees crowds amassing around the school to look at the blaze, and to her horror she recognizes that one of the people is Heather. She seems to be nodding to herself, as though she knows something that nobody else does. Tori turns to Celeste to say, "You don't think that Heather blames me, do you?" But Celeste is gone. Vanished. But now that she's thinking about her old friend, she starts to realize that this is completely insane. She's not a criminal. She shouldn't be burning down the school. What came over? What's going on? So she decides she has to confront Celeste again. So she sneaks home, making sure that nobody in the crowd see her, and no one at home when she sneaks back in through the back door. She has just a little bit of that flying salve left, so she rubs it on herself and she goes outside. It's much past midnight now, but despite that, the fireflies come again and they lead her to the pond where Celeste is waiting. And Tori tries to confront her, but it doesn't exactly go as planned. I'm going to read an excerpt from the book. Celeste rushed out from under the tree. Her face was glowing. "Wasn't it wonderful? Did you see those beautiful flames?" she shouted, raising her arms and spinning round and round like a dancer. "Now school is out. We can have real fun." Her laughter filled the air. "Celeste, how can you say that? We burned down the school." Hot tears stung Tori's eyes. "We were just supposed to have adventures. All I wanted was to do fun things, not burn down the school. Celeste, how could you do a thing like that?" Celeste's smile turned to a sneer. "Don't kid yourself, Tori Pardo. You're the one who did everything. You dreamed me up in your mind. I'm not just your secret friend. I'm your imaginary friend. Remember? I've already explained to you who I am." Tori gasped. But I didn't mean..." Her voice trailed off as the terrible meaning of Celeste's words sank in. "Oh, yes, you did. You craved adventure and excitement so badly, you could hardly stand it." Celeste spat out the words and looked at Tori through narrow slit-like eyes. "First, when Max was born, and you thought your parents were ignoring you, you felt lonely and forgotten. Next, when you had trouble finding anyone your age to play with in tiny little Dornberg, you felt lonely and forgotten all over again. That was when you created me out of the energy from your mind. You drew me up and made me into the real-life friend you couldn't find. I didn't mind. I loved the job of making sure you had a good time. And we did have fun, didn't we?" Tori nodded in silence. Everything Celeste was saying was true. "And you thought that when Heather came along, you didn't need me anymore, that I would just disappear, that I would just stop existing. Well, you were wrong. I've been here all along, watching you give your friendship to Heather instead of me. I've been waiting for the moment you realize that I'm a better friend than Heather could ever be. And while I was waiting, I was absorbing more and more energy from your mind. I was getting stronger and more powerful with every passing day. And now that Heather is deserting you for the summer and you need me again, I'm back. Now, finally, Tori seems to be realizing just how dangerous this girl is. And so she demands that she leave her alone, that she leave her and Heather alone. But this is when she runs away and she decides to go to Heather. After all, she threatened Heather's life now, so she needs to go and make sure her friend is safe. By this time, it's early morning, and so she heads straight for Heather's house. But when she knocks on the door and Heather opens the door to see that it's Tori there, she tries to close the door in her face because, remember, they're still at odds at this point. But I guess through a combination of the fact that she only has one working arm and Tori's insistence that she has to listen to her because she's in danger, Heather finally decides to listen to her old friend. They head up to Heather's room and then Tori explains everything. The book sort of skips over it, but she tells her everything that's happened, including her imaginary friend. And after all this, Heather seems like she's a little bit forgiving of her friend, but at the same time, she basically says, yeah, but I still don't really believe you. You're saying this was an imaginary friend? That doesn't make any sense. And girl, true, but that's when the door opens and Heather's mum says, oh, your friend Celeste is here. And then in walks Celeste, both to prove that, yeah, she is real, and also to end this once and for all, because this is the final confrontation. Gleefully, Celeste then takes off her shoes, pulls out her shoelaces, and turns them into snakes and sicks them on the girls. And of course, Tori and Heather are panicking. They're trying to escape the room. They're calling out for help. And Celeste explains, no, your mother can't hear you. The doors are locked. I'm using my magic. You can't escape from this. And this is when Tori realizes, wait a minute. You're an imaginary friend. You're in my head. You're under my control. And so she thinks the snakes back into shoelaces. And Celeste is like, oh, you think you're so smart, don't you? And she starts working up some other kind of magic. But it doesn't matter. What matters is that Tori then says to Heather, I know how to defeat her once and for all. We'll show her what true friendship is. And then they start saying like, you're my best friend because I love hanging out with you at the mall. And she's like, yeah, and I love talking to you about boys. And she's like, and I like playing games with you. And she's like, and I like hanging out with you on the weekends. And they're like going back and forth talking. And Celeste tries to get in that sort of evil, like, oh, that's not real friendship. That's boring. You want excitement. They're like, no, that's not true friendship. True friendship is being there for one another. And then Celeste fades into nothingness. And at the end, Heather even ends it off by saying, you know what, I don't even know why I'd want to go on vacation. I want to spend my summer vacation with you. The end. First things first, I don't know how you could possibly think that's the end. Girl, you burnt down the school and you gave your principal a coughing fit. You're going to jail. But more importantly, I really don't like this ending. I mean, obviously it's generic as hell. The real way to defeat the monster was the friends we made along the way. Silly. But more importantly, this girl has been horrible this whole book. She's been whinging and whining, gleefully putting people through hell. She's been, excusing all of her horrible actions. She burnt the school down and was laughing maniacally about this. And yet at the end, she gets everything she wants. What? No, that doesn't make any sense. Especially because, to me, the real lesson here, friendship is about overcoming. It's not just about having someone who is always there. It's also about knowing that they're there for you even when they can't be. Heather doesn't have any power to stop their parents going on vacation. Her parents aren't going to let her stay at her home on her own with a broken arm for the entire summer. That doesn't make any sense. What would make more sense to me is for her to say, look, I am your best friend. I care about you so much that I will be looking forward to seeing you when you get back. And for a book that is so heavily about friendship, these girls seem to kind of hate each other an awful lot. Like, you could say maybe that Celeste was influencing that a little bit, but at the same time, I feel like that's just bad plot structure. Obviously, the first time when they break up, because she trips over and she blames her, the main reason for that is to give Tori an excuse to use the bath spell, right? Because we've already established that Heather is a very reasonable, rational character. If Tori went to her and said, hey, I've got this bath spell, wouldn't it be really funny to do this to all the kids in school? Heather would say, no, how about we don't do that because it's a horrible thing to do? End of book. So they had to come up with some contrivance to explain why she decided to do it to everyone, including Heather, and Heather couldn't stop her. And so they had to be friends and then break up and not be friends and then be friends again and then break up. It's a silly way of formatting the book, in my opinion, especially because, like I said, at the very beginning of the book, she's not a very nice character. She's doing horrible things. And like the first time she does magic, she's like smirking to herself, hey, my brother kind of deserved it. And it's like, well, yeah, but you also kind of made the town flood. Like later on the news were like in boats because of flooding and it destroyed their houses. Like, I mean, it doesn't go into too much detail. And I'll discuss that later, the issue with descriptions. But like, this is a horrible thing. And you're like smirking to yourself of like, oh, hey, I know I totally ruined some lives, but my brother didn't get the baseball team thing he liked, so win-win for me. Like, that is sociopathic behavior. Like, that's the whole thing. For those who don't know, I keep using the term sociopath. The way I understand it is a sociopath, they're incapable of feeling the emotions that other people go through. And that's literally what this girl's doing. Like, she's done something that gives her benefit, and yes, other people suffer, but she's incapable of recognizing that fact. She just thinks, hey, worked out for me. And maybe that's also because, like, the imaginary friend is clearly sociopathic. Like, is it meant to be like this aspect of her? I don't know. But the book doesn't really go into that. And it's a major element of her character and of this imaginary friend character. So it's difficult to have both the thread of the story be that this girl is sociopathic and she's doing these horrible things, but she's also got a best friend. Like, what? I don't know how this came about, because if you ask me, right, as soon as I finished the book, I sort of had an idea of how to fix this. Because honestly, what surprised me when I first picked up this book and I read the title Strange Brew, I was confused because it's about magic. Magic is cool, but also magic has already been done in horror before, and it already has a history that makes a lot of sense, right? Because the whole thing with magic, at least in the ye olden days when people believed magic was real, the issue was that magic is very powerful, but it also supposedly comes from demons. Right? That's the whole issue. Like, it comes from Satan. So there's your plot hook. She wants to become magical, but magic is evil, right? So why are you throwing in this whole, like, the magic actually comes from her sick sociopathic imaginary friend that is real for reasons that the book gleefully refuses to explain? You could easily have it that she finds a magic book and she uses that to create herself a best friend. Maybe this best friend is in the image of her imaginary friend, doesn't matter. And then it quickly turns out that this imaginary friend is actually a demon. And that's why it's leading her down this dark path, because by her doing more and more horrible things, it's leeching more magic from her, more of her power, and bringing itself to life. And then you could still do the same thing about her regaining power from her friend, because then her friend is the one who has to save her at the end. You don't have to have this silly, it's the power of my mind compels you nonsense at the end. Instead, you could have it that her friend supports her and defeats the demon by bringing her power back, by reminding her of the strength she has in her friendship. Like, that makes sense. Still not necessarily the best, because it does still perpetuate this whole thing with witchcraft being associated with devilry. It's a little bit problematic because the whole witchcraft and power thing is associated with feminism and the power of womanhood and femininity. And the reason it's been associated with devil worship is just because it's from women, basically. Like, that's literally it. It's misogyny in a nutshell. So yeah, there's issues there, I'm not going to lie, but it's a better plot than this. It's memorable, at least. Hey, throw a demon in there, that's a bit of fun. If you want to counteract the whole anti-feminism thing, make the demon a dude. And then end the story how she still has magic, but now their friends use it together. There you go, solve that problem. But one thing it definitely doesn't solve is this book's poor descriptions. Like I said, there are like 3 or 4 different scenes in this book that should be really cool. I mean, she caused a storm that flooded her town. She caused bubbles to flow through her classroom. She flew through the sky like an angel. And yet in every single one of these scenes, I barely remember it, because I felt like I was watching a movie in that they just sort of described what happened. It's like, oh, her feet weren't touching the floor. Okay, cool. That's not how you do a great description. You know, and here's the trick for you writers out there, is that you should use your senses, right? So the first thing that comes to mind, right? When it's raining that much, what does it smell like? What does it feel like when the ground beneath you turns to water. Like, yeah, obviously the place floods. Yeah, cool. I can see that, but what does it feel like to have water seeping into your socks as it's rising up above your ankles? When you get that cold shiver down your spine because all of your clothes are sticking to your skin, there's that wet smell in the air of mud and muck. It's no longer just clean, fresh rainwater. It smells like mud surrounding you. You can smell the garbage and muck that's floating through the water. You see what I mean? Like, this is evocative. This is memorable. And this book just isn't that. It's incapable of sticking in the mind because it has such a generic idea for the moral. It has such a weak plot going back and forth with these spells, and it just doesn't describe its scenes in a way that sticks in your mind. And speaking of the plot, I have to say, I feel like, especially at the end, I was saying, you know what, this has some tension now because they don't tell you what the spells do, right? And that's kind of interesting. But you know what I think would be even better is if the spell's tensions also ratcheted up. As I said, it already makes no sense to go straight from storm to barfing, then back down to bubbles. Interesting little twist, but at the same time, it doesn't make sense that she'd be just as invested in magic if it both ruins lives, causes vomiting, and then also makes pretty bubbles and flying. Why not make it more consistent? Why not have it be that it's slowly luring her in? Like, that's the whole idea of magic. It's this bait luring you into power. And they sort of hint at the idea that she likes the power, but it's also at the end, they're implying that it's not about power so much as just excitement. Which, I don't know about you, but watching people throw up isn't exciting to me. But why not have it be slow and steady? This is why my favorite bit has to be the flying. Because flying, on the one hand, is something that everyone wishes they could do. It's really cool. But on the other hand, there's a huge danger there. You know, risk of falling, risk of people seeing you and realizing that you have powers. There's other ways of going about it, but I think that's a great example of how magic could lure you in with promises of power and magic and amazing life adventures, and then revealing that there's a demon behind it all. But this book doesn't do that. It's plodding, it's unimpressive, it is literally forgettable. And so, I'm afraid to say that this has to be a D+. The only reason it gets a D+ is, like I said, I like some of those little aspects. The dialogue is done pretty well. I don't like the descriptions, but I did like the dialogue, especially from Celeste. They characterize her pretty well. And I do like some of the sympathetic magic and some of the little things that make the spells kind of make sense. I think the one that makes the least sense is probably the whole bubble one. I don't understand how mud and grass makes bubbles, but whatever. But everything else kind of made sense. So I did enjoy that, but this plot is so bad, these characters are frustrating to deal with, and I think I'm actually looking forward to forgetting this book because it really did not bring me any joy or fun. It was nowhere near as much fun as the prior book. So for you writers out there, I think the first bit of advice is very obvious. It is use those senses, those sensations. It's what makes a scene memorable, but the reason it's memorable is because it feels real. You can put yourself in that scene. The image feels like you're there, feeling and smelling and tasting and touching it for yourself. Bring the reader into your scenes with you, so that even something as simple as a heavy downpour can become truly threatening, truly immersive. Quick little point on that. It's something I've learned and I've really enjoyed when it comes to writing. I've learned that one of the worst things you can do with sensations is distancing language. So whilst you should use these sensations, it's a bad idea to do them through the main character. It's a bad idea to say something like, oh, Tori felt the rain on her skin. Or as she wandered through, she could smell the garbage in the air. Because as much as it does bring you into the character's headspace, it means that it's not in your headspace. It's distancing language. Instead say, the rain was cold and freezing, and as the rubbish bins tipped over, the smell of garbage permeated the air. This literally cuts out the middleman and means that the reader can experience these sensations more directly. My second bit of advice, I admit this one may not be for everyone because it's definitely more related to the way that I like to write. But from my perspective, if you're writing a story and you have some morals, some meaning in your story, I want you to really mean it. Maybe it's because I'm a real theme guy. I like figuring out, sometimes even reverse engineering from my initial idea, what my story's motivation is, what the meaning is behind it, and then I use that to drive my plot. I use that to define my characters. I use that to decide how the story should be told in a way that expresses that in the most obvious, clear, or fascinating way. Twice now, I've had stories where the morals seem to come at the end like, by the way, Thanksgiving and friendship and stuff like that. Why? That's a horrible way of writing a story. It comes out of nowhere. It feels like those, Sonic Says or whatever at the end of an episode. It's like, here's the educational segment at the end of the episode. Now go home and pretend you learned something, kids. No. Why do that when you can start from the beginning and start eking in this message, and so that people can't help but learn something? I know that this isn't the way that everyone writes, but the reason why I choose to is because, as far as I'm concerned, a book, even a book like this, that only takes an hour or less to read, you're still taking up a portion of someone's life when you have them read your story. And when they're done, they should come away with it having learnt something, or having experienced something that they couldn't have otherwise. Because your book can be silly, it could be stupid, it could be wrong, but the worst thing you could possibly do is waste time. And when your book is this forgettable, that's really all it's done. Thankfully, the next book we have on our lineup, which is called Teacher Creature, it's going to be a bit more interesting. It actually deals with a very common trope that you find in chapter spooks, but we'll talk all about it when we get to that episode. Until then, hey, if you thought that was scary, just wait to see what I've got in store for you next time.